This is the story of South Korea's first ever serial killer. Hey guys, and welcome to Kimchi Recaps. In today's video, we'll be recapping the movie Memories of Murder, which was inspired by the true crime story of South Korea's first recorded serial killings. The movie begins with Detective Park arriving at a crime scene where he finds the dead body of a girl under the sewage, with no clothes and her hands tied back. Following this discovery, Detective Park begins to investigate by questioning all possible culprits. He questions the dead girl's ex-boyfriend and all other criminals with dodgy backgrounds. Detective Park believes his instincts are world-class and he can catch a criminal just by looking into their eyes. But he hasn't found any concrete evidence to arrest anyone. Before Detective Park is able to close this case, yet another dead body is found in a field with her hands tied back. He's a little concerned about it, as this is among a string of dead bodies that have been found in his town. While out with a town escort named Seo-young, Detective Park gets to hear something interesting. Seo-young confides that she has heard rumors about a boy who had been following one of the dead girls on the day of their murder. Seo-young is referring to a mentally handicapped boy named Baek with burn scars on one side of his face. Based on hearsay, Detective Park takes Baek into custody without any proof or arrest warrant. Moreover, he calls in his junior, Detective Ju, to beat a confession out of Baek. Next day, we see a woman walking nervously in front of a man she hasn't seen in the town before. Afraid that he might be the serial killer, she walks hurriedly and trips on her way. Just then, Detective Park arrives at the scene, takes it as the serial killer attacking his next victim, and drop-kicks the mysterious man before handcuffing him to his car. It is only later he finds out that this mysterious man is Detective Tae, who has been sent from Seoul to help solve this case of serial killings. On their way to the police station, Detective Park takes Baek's shoes to the murder site and leaves a footprint to take a picture and mark it as evidence. It is clear that Detective Park truly believes Baek is the killer, and he only needs a confession out of him. He later takes the picture to Baek and shows it to him as evidence of his crime. However, Baek is persistent that he didn't kill anyone. In order to scare him, Baek is taken outdoors where the detectives, apart from Detective Tae, threaten to bury Baek if he doesn't confess to the murders. Right then, Baek slowly begins to describe one of the murders very clearly and with all the details that only the police knew of. Detective Tae finally takes interest in Baek, who continues on to describe how one of the women was assaulted and choked to death. Based on the clear description, the detectives believe Baek really is the killer. But when asked why he murdered those women, Baek once again says that he didn't murder anyone. While the other detectives focus on Baek, Detective Tae begins to look at the evidence and finds something that proves Baek's innocence. He sees that the victim's hands were tied, using an intricate method. He then looks at Baek's hands and sees his hands were burned, and his fingers are webbed together, meaning he can't even hold a chopstick with his hands, let alone use a complicated knot to tie someone's hands. Baek, on the other hand, finally confesses due to the police torture and is asked to provide a public reenactment of his crimes. Detective Tae tries to stop this, but his plea goes unheard as the other detectives are convinced that Baek committed the murder and want to close this case ASAP. Nevertheless, Baek's parents arrive and disturb the reenactment, and Baek is set free when it's revealed that he was tortured in the police custody. Following this blunder, a new chief is sent to oversee the investigation. He soon finds out that the detectives are very incompetent. When asked if there were any patterns in the murders, Detective Tae reveals that all previous murder took place on a rainy night, and all the victims were wearing a red dress. Moreover, he reveals that there is one more dead body that hasn't been found yet. He takes out his documents and shows records of a young girl missing on a rainy night while wearing a red dress. Detective Tae is sure that this missing person was murdered by the same killer that they are looking for. While Detective Park and Ju don't take this seriously, the new chief allows Detective Tae to get a search team and start looking for the dead body. And soon enough, The dead body of the missing girl is found, and upon forensic test, it is found that she was killed the same way the other victims were. This takes Detective Park's suspicion out of Bake, and in order to set things right, he gifts Bake a pair of new shoes. Meanwhile, there's some tension brewing between Detective Park and Tay due to their opposing methods and beliefs on the case. Regardless of their rivalry, one thing is clear. The serial killer targets specific ladies and at specific times. So the next time it rains, it is certain that the serial killer will target his next victim. And soon enough, it rains. Knowing how the serial killer operates, the detectives are on high alert. They even set a trap by letting one of their officers wear a red dress and walk alone on a dark road. Unfortunately, the serial killer doesn't strike, and instead they find two schoolgirls on their way home. The female detective asks the schoolgirls to stay close to them until it stops raining. During this, the schoolgirls talk about a rumor going around in their school. The rumor is that there is a crazy man who lives in an outhouse behind their school, who gets out at night and kills innocent women. The officers don't take this seriously and think of it as a silly rumor that young kids made. Elsewhere, a woman is getting ready to go get her husband from work. Before heading out, she has a change of mind and changes her jacket. On her way, she sings a song to keep her company. It is dark, and she only has a small flashlight. Just then, she hears someone whistling and turns around to find no one. But she fails to see the shadowy figure just meters behind her. Nonetheless, the eerie atmosphere makes her scared, and she makes a run for her life. Next day, her dead body is found, and Detective Tay shouts at everyone to stay away from the crime scene so that no evidence is corrupted before the forensic team's arrival. Detective Tay finds the footprints that were left by the killer and points at the factory, stating the killer caught her near the factory and brought her 400 meters away to commit the crime. Detective Tay's approach in analyzing the crime scene and evidence seem more practical, whereas Detective Park keeps suggesting absurd ideas that could lead to the killer. For example, he suggests that since they found no hair left by the killer must have no pubic hair. So he suggests that a Buddhist monk might be the one they're looking for. No surprise, the chief chooses to ignore Detective Park's suggestion. Just when they're discussing the crime, a female officer named Kwan says she has something to show. She shows them documents from an evening radio show where listeners can request songs. Officer Kwan points out that there's one listener who always requests one specific song called Sad Letter. And what's more interesting is that the listener always requested this song when it was raining, and all the murders took place hours after this song was played on the radio. While Detective Park mocks Officer Kwan and dismisses this as a mere coincidence, Detective Tay, however, sees the connection and believes the person who requested this song to be played on radio could be the killer. He quickly goes to the radio station and asks to see the postcard that was sent by the mysterious person who requested the song Sad Letter. But since the radio station is a bit disorganized, Detective Tay has to look for the postcard all by himself in a large pile of postcards. However, despite his efforts, he is unable to find the postcard that could lead him to the killer. Meanwhile, Detective Park is still sure that the killer has no pubic hair, and he roams around in public bathhouses to find a man with no pubic hair. After failing to find a man without any pubic hair, Detective Park is advised by Seol Young to seek a shaman's help. Desperate to find the killer, Detective Park visits the town shaman, who tells him to perform a ritual which will reveal the killer's identity. As per the ritual, Detective Park and Ju visit the crime scene where they mix the crime scene dirt with some water and pour it over a paper which will reveal the killer's face. And just when they're waiting for the paper to dry up, they hear a sound of someone approaching. They quickly hide away and see a man walking over the crime scene. As they peek to take a look, they see that it's none other than Detective Tay, listening to the song Sad Letter. Detective Park is surprised to see this, and before he could confront Detective Park, their attention is turned towards another person approaching the crime scene. Detective Tay quickly takes cover as an unknown man walks forward. Not knowing that the detectives are watching his every move, the unknown man takes out a bra from his pants and is about to pleasure himself right at the crime scene. However, he senses the presence of someone watching over him and quickly makes a run for his life. All the detectives are now running after this man who quite possibly could be the serial killer they're looking for. After a few minutes of chase, the detectives are led to a construction site where they lose sight of the suspect. Amongst thousands of workers, it seems impossible to find the suspect. However, Detective Park spots one worker wearing a red panty, and it turns out that he is the suspect they were chasing after. When questioned about his intentions, the suspect answers that he was simply just pleasuring himself at the crime scene. Turns out, he is not the serial killer, but just a sick pervert who was getting excited by the crimes happening in his town. However, Detective Park desperately tries to get a confession out of him as he truly believes he is the serial killer. While Detective Park gets busy trying to get a confession, Detective Tay goes to the school outhouse that the schoolgirls were talking about, just in case he finds something of interest. At the school, he meets In-sun, the same girl who told him about the strange outhouse around her school. Detective Tay finds that In-sun had injured herself during a school activity, so he helps her by putting a Band-Aid on her wound. After that, he goes to the outhouse in hopes of finding any clue. But what he finds is the school doctor who yells at him for believing a stupid story made by her students. But then she tells her about a crying woman and points to the house where she lives. Detective Tay walks towards the house and finds a girl living in a pretty rough condition. While approaching the girl for questioning, the girl gets scared and locks herself inside the house. While pleading with the girl to come out, Detective Tay sees a red cloth hanging on the clothesline. Moments later, Officer Kwan is questioning the girl while recording their conversation to keep evidence. Turns out, this girl was also a victim of the serial killer, but was lucky to have stayed alive. She reveals that she didn't see the serial killer's face, but recounts that his hands were soft and delicate, almost like a woman's. Meanwhile, Detective Park has beaten up the pervert so badly that he's ready to sign the confession. Detective Tay then arrives and looks at the pervert's hands. Realizing how his hands weren't soft and delicate as the woman earlier recounted, Detective Tay asks the pervert to be let go. Detective Park gets frustrated and finally gets in a fight with Detective Tay, claiming he's trying to ruin his case. The chief tries to break the fight, but it's Officer Kwan who does it by bringing their attention to the radio, which is playing the song "Sad Letter." The detectives are surprised to hear that it's a live broadcast, and Detective Tay quickly checks outside to find that it's raining. They quickly get to work trying to get backup force and any intel on the person who requested the song to be played on radio. However, they fail to organize anything, and the next morning, the dead body of a girl is found, killed the exact same way all the others were. Finally, Detective Park admits that he was wrong and tears off his list of suspects. Meanwhile, Officer Kwan finds the postcard sent by the person who requested the song "Sad Letter" to be played on a rainy night. The address on the postcard leads the detectives to the house where their new suspect lives. Through a woman, they find out that the owner of the house works at a factory. They quickly go to the factory and find Park Hyun-kyu, the young man who looks too innocent to be capable of killing several women. Park Hyun-kyu is brought into custody where Detective Tay checks his hands and finds it soft and delicate, unlike most men. Moreover, it is found that Hyun-kyu began working in the factory about the same time as the first murder. The detectives show him the postcard he had sent to the radio station and all the links between his song request and the series of murder. However, Hyun-kyu profusely refuses that he has any connection to the deaths. When asked where he was at the time of last night's murder, Hyun-kyu replies he was at home listening to the radio show. Detective Tay asks him to name the last song which was played on the radio show, but Hyun-kyu replies that he doesn't remember it. While discussing how to get concrete evidence that will confirm Hyun-kyu as the serial killer, the detectives recall how Baek was able to recall the murder in such detail. They realize that Baek could be the sole eyewitness to the murder and hurry to get in touch with him. They go to Baek's family restaurant, but don't find him there. While waiting for him, Detective Ju gets in a fight with a bunch of locals. Just then, Baek arrives and is furious to see Detective Ju causing a scene in his family restaurant. Out of anger, Baek strikes Detective Ju's leg with a broken piece of table and is able to cause serious damage. Afraid of going to jail, Baek makes a run with Detective Park and Tae running after him. Baek then climbs up a pole and refuses to come down. The detectives persuade him to come down and ask him to recall the night he saw one of the victims get murdered. Baek recalls that the murder took place right in the paddy fields, where he clearly saw the killer's face from a hiding spot. Just when the detectives show him a photo of Hyun-kyu to confirm he's the killer, the locals, who Detective Ju got in a fight with earlier, arrive and try to fight Detective Park and Tae. During this, Baek is able to get away and unknowingly stands in front of a railway track. Detective Park desperately tries to reach him, but it's too late. Baek gets hit by the train, and all that remains is the shoe that Detective Park got him. With no eyewitness left and no concrete evidence, Hyun-kyu is allowed to go home. Just when it looks like there's no hope of solving the case, the forensic team shows them that they have found semen on the dead body, which could lead them to the murderer. The chief asks if the DNA from the semen can be matched with Hyun-kyu to convict him of the murder. The forensic expert replies that it can be done, but only outside of Korea, as they don't have the technology to extract DNA from semen and match it with someone else. Thus, the evidence is sent to the United States, where all the tests will be done and a result will be sent in a few weeks. While waiting for the result, the chief asks a group of police officers to keep a close eye on Hyun-kyu. Meanwhile, Detective Park notices a strong swelling on Detective Ju's leg and takes him to a doctor. Turns out the leg was infected from the injury, and the doctor reveals that Detective Ju's leg needs to be amputated. With sad realization, Detective Park signs the consent form for Detective Ju's surgery, which will leave him without one leg for the rest of his life. Elsewhere, Detective Tae is closely keeping an eye on Hyun-kyu, not letting him out of his sight. However, after hours of watching him eat at a restaurant, Detective Tae falls asleep. And when he wakes up, he sees Hyun-kyu getting on a bus. Unluckily, Detective Tae's car fails to start, and just like that, he loses track of Hyun-kyu. Detective Tae tries to warn his chief, who refutes him by saying a man under investigation wouldn't act stupid, and they have nothing to worry about. However, Detective Tae is anxious. Moments later, the night strikes. We see In-sun returning home from school. A man is looking at her from afar, and soon enough In-sun gets abducted. No doubt, this is the same man who killed all the other women. In-sun gets taken far away, and she is close to becoming the next victim of this serial killer. Next day, it's a rainy morning, and Detective Tae, along with a bunch of police officers, arrive at the crime scene. Detective Tae quickly recognizes In-sun through the band-aid he had helped put on her wound. Detective Tae is brought into guilt and regret that he was the one who let Hyun-kyu out of his sight, and now an innocent young girl is dead because of his mistake. Fueled by anger, Detective Tae storms into Hyun-kyu's house and takes him to an abandoned railway track, ready to take matters in his own hands. Detective Tae is convinced that Hyun-kyu is the killer, and he is ready to kill him. Just then, Detective Park arrives with the forensic report from the United States. Detective Tae then takes a look at the report and is completely shocked to find the result. The report states that the semen found on the victim doesn't match with the DNA of Hyun-kyu, meaning he is not the murderer. Detective Park then takes a look at Hyun-kyu, unable to really tell if he's capable of all the crimes he is suspected of committing. Nevertheless, Detective Tae is adamant on killing Hyun-kyu, but is stopped by Detective Park. With no evidence of the real killer and the report stating him to be innocent, the detectives have no option but to let Hyun-kyu leave, and with that, the series of murder cases go unsolved. Years later, Detective Tay has quit his police job and has a happy family. He works as a salesman, but the past still haunts him. So, he goes to visit the first ever crime scene of the serial killer he was unable to catch, looking back on the past and the possibilities that could have been if he had caught the serial killer. Just then, a little schoolgirl asks him what's in the sewage. Detective Park replies, "Nothing really?" Then the girl says that a man was looking in the sewage just like him, and he said he had done something in the sewage years back. No doubt, it's the serial killer. Detective Park asks how the man looked like to get a profile on him, although he's no longer a policeman. The girl replies that the man looked just normal, like anyone. Then, Detective Park looks straight ahead, implying that the serial killer is still alive, uncaught and watching the movie just like us. And that's a wrap on our recap of Memories of Murder. It's a story that haunts us with its unresolved ending. What do you think about the final twist? Do you think the real killer was ever brought to justice? Join the discussion in the comments section and share your theories. For more gripping recaps, subscribe to Kimchi Recaps and hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.